Prime Minister left the cabinet retreat. Reporters waited to, again, try and ask him questions. Many of us shouted questions about whether or not he had spoken to U.S. President Donald Trump since Davos. Of course, this was all before the invite had been rescinded. The Prime Minister did not take questions, but commented something to the effect that questions about Donald Trump and whether they had spoken were boring, and that we should try and ask different questions. So we have not heard from the Prime Minister on our questions since last night or this morning as he made his way in. We'll be looking to get answers today, but at this point, he's not expected to take questions from the media. At least that's not part of his schedule as it stands. Last night...
There you have it, guys. Prime Minister Mark Carney, I don't want to talk about it. You guys are asking poor questions. I don't want to talk about it. And that's basically what we get for playing on a strong rhetoric without the actual backbone to support whatever we're trying to do. And that's exactly what happened, right? We're getting bit in the ass because we're not able to project in the same way we're able to speak in public. We all know what just happened, right? Donald Trump threatened Canada with a 100% tariff if we make a trade deal with China. The government says there is no trade deal. The media says Trump is being erratic. And Carney's team says this is all about canola farmers and pragmatic diversification. But really, when you look at what actually happened, none of this really holds up, guys. I don't think this was a miscalculation. And I don't think this was naivety. And I don't really think this was diversification either. I think this was a deliberate provocation dressed up as trade policy. And now Canada is discovering exactly what happens when rhetoric outruns the leverage. And what's the wider context of this story that we're here that we're seeing here? So Trump posted on his Truth Social messaging app, threatening a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods if Canada makes a trade deal with China. So across the board, he called Governor Carney instead of Prime Minister. He said that Canada would become a drop-off port for Chinese goods flooding into the U.S. And he also said that China would eat Canada alive and completely devour it. Dominic LeBlanc, the minister responsible for the Canada-U.S. trade, literally responded that there is no pursuit of a free trade deal with China. And technically, he's right. Under USMCA Article 32-10, it already prohibits Canada from doing comprehensive trade deals with non-market economies like China. And David McNaughton, Canada's former ambassador to Washington, pointed this out as well. He said the canola for EVs arrangement is hardly a trade deal, and the USMCA explicitly prevents what Trump is threatening to push. So what is this actually really about? Because if the USMCA already prevents China trying to trade a deal from happening, and if Canada isn't actually pursuing one, then why threaten Canada with 100% tariffs? And this is what I think the article is missing, and this is what the media isn't portraying, is that this isn't about what Canada is doing today. It's about what Carney signed last week. So Carney's China deal was deliberately provocative and not pragmatic. And I just want to kind of start with that timeline because the sequence really matters, right? In 2024, China's largest EV maker, BYD, was planning to build a massive factory in Mexico on the border with the US. And it would have been one of the largest auto plants in the world, right? And obviously it was to supply all of North America with BYD vehicles, to flood the North American market with electric EVs, basically to kill Tesla. And the plan was to manufacture EVs in Mexico, but when Trump threatened the 200% tariff on Chinese vehicles built in Mexico, the BYD stopped. And BYD stopped while Trump wasn't even in office. He was just running for office. This was during the elections. He said, if I'm in, that's not going to happen. And they stopped. They immediately stopped to wait to see who would win the election. And so by March 2025, China's Ministry of Commerce delayed approval for the project entirely, citing concerns that Chinese technology could leak to the US if the factory was built so close to the American border. And BYD's executive vice president said explicitly, geopolitical issues have a big impact on the automotive industry. What is this really translated to? Trump's pressure works. It works. And China couldn't get into the North American market through Mexico. So what does Carney do? He flies to Beijing in January 2026 and cuts a deal to allow 49,000 Chinese EVs into Canada at a 6.1% tariff. That's down from the 100% tariff Canada imposed in 2024. So, no big deal. We're gonna reduce the tariff by 94%, right? Guys, this is functionally free trade. And it opens the door to exactly what China couldn't achieve through Mexico. It starts with, we're importing cars. You get the economy used to cheap Chinese EVs, and then you start bringing more of that investment in. And now the government's framing this as if, we're just helping canola farmers, guys. It's no big deal, right? We're gonna get these awesome electric cars, and we're gonna have a market for our canola farmers. No big deal, guys. And China had already they slapped the retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola after Trudeau imposed that EV tariff, right? So Carney's negotiation was lower the canola tariffs and we'll let in some Chinese EVs. It sounds pragmatic for some, except for one thing. Immediately after signing the deal in Beijing, Carney flew to Davos, Switzerland, and gave a speech at the World Economic Forum criticizing the US for economic coercion. He said the rules-based international order is dead. He said middle powers need to stop pretending and start building coalitions to resist great powers that prey on smaller countries to take what they want. He even urged countries to publicly condemn economic coercion, even when practiced by an ally. And that's not coincidence, guys. That's a sequence. Beijing deal, Davos criticism of the US, and Trump's response. If this was really about canola, why follow it immediately with a public lecture about American economic coercion? This is the kicker here, though. Trump initially praised the China deal. On January 17th, he told the reporters that that's what he should be doing. It's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a trade deal with China, you should do it. And I don't think Trump, in and of himself, cares if Canada trades with China. There are industries that are red lines for security concerns. And it wasn't until Carney's Davos speech that Trump actually flipped. I believe that he would have done it even without the Davos speech. I don't think the U.S. would have supported this in any way. But he ended up threatening right after the Davos speech with 100% tariff. So this isn't Trump being erratic. This is Trump responding to what Carney signaled. Carney opened the door to Chinese EVs that China couldn't get through Mexico, then went to Davos to criticize U.S. economic behavior, and then acted surprised when Washington responded. Guys, this isn't pragmatism, it's provocation. And the other thing that I don't really understand is the question that I haven't seen anybody in the media actually ask is, where is the evidence that Carney tried to negotiate a deal with Donald Trump before going to China? Because the most obvious economic problem facing Canada right now is U.S. tariffs. Trump has already imposed the 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, 25% on autos, 35% on goods traded outside of the USMCA. So it's significantly higher duties on softwood lumber as well. 75% of Canadian exports go to the US, guys, and only 5% go to China. So if you're trying to solve Canada's short-term economic woes, the first rational step is to exhaust all negotiation with the US. Fly to Donald Trump. Don't leave the Oval Office. Be annoying. But there's no evidence that Carney did that. There's no emergency talks. There's no pushing for a revised USMCA proposal. There's no attempt to tie trade to security cooperation or continental supply chains. No. Let's fly to Beijing, guys. Let's cut a deal with China immediately. And then let's go to Davos and criticize the Americans for economic coercion. Doesn't sound like strategy to me, guys. This sounds like a priority inversion. And if the argument is we're diversifying because we can't rely on the US, then show me where you tried. Show me where you attempted to do this. Show me the negotiation that failed. Show me the proposal Trump rejected, or the proposal that you rejected from Trump. Because right now, it looks like Carney skipped that negotiation that actually matters for Canada and went straight to a symbolic gesture that completely undermines it. And this kind of ties me into my next point, right? Is that Canada likes to act like an equal when we're not really equal. And this is kind of the uncomfortable part that needs to be said out loud, but it's structurally true. Canada is not a free-floating middle power. We're not like Turkey, where we're not really in Asia, but we're not really in Europe either. But there's 80 million of us, and we're on 2 seas, and we're in a strategically important place and we can kind of push our way through. Canada is geographically, economically, militarily, and our entire security apparatus is embedded in the US system. Guys, that doesn't mean that Canada has no agency, but it does mean the agency is very constrained. And those constraints are not new, guys. Canada signed the USMCA. Article 3210 explicitly restricts comprehensive trade deals with non-market economies. It requires 3 months notice before starting free trade talks with China, disclosure of negotiation of objectives, 30 days notice before signing, and the right for the US to withdraw from the USMCA within 6 months if Canada crosses the line. A 6% tariff, a 94% drop in tariffs on Chinese EVs. They think that they didn't cross a red line, but you're effectively giving them free trade. And Canada agreed to all of this. And David McNaughton, who negotiated the USMCA, says this plainly: the deal already prohibits what Trump is threatening to push. So why is Ottawa acting surprised by enforcement of rules it signed on to? And here's the deeper issue. The US is not just enforcing the USMCA. It's consolidating its sphere, guys. We have to look at the broader context constantly. Trump is pushing for control of Greenland. Arctic security is the top priority. The US is hardening its positioning on Chinese influence in the hemisphere. The whole Greenland thing is about not allowing Chinese and the Russians to use the Arctic for trade routes into the Atlantic, and for stopping any naval assets that they have coming through the Arctic into the Atlantic. Because that's exactly the sphere. That entire ocean is European and North American, at least the northern half. China tried to build an EV factory in Mexico. The US blocked it. Now Carney opens Canada to Chinese EVs and signals openness to Chinese investment in Canada's energy grid and EV supply chains, guys. And for Washington, from Washington's perspective, guys, that's not diversification. That's free trade. 6% is not a big tariff. That's not a levy. That's letting China in through the back door. And when Trump calls Governor Carney, he's not just being insulting. He's asserting hierarchy. The US sets the perimeter that Canada operates within. Deviation gets corrected, guys, and that's not new behavior. It's unusually explicit. So what's the actual strategy here, guys? That's being uncovered. This is where it's all falling apart too, because if you look at what Carney actually accomplished, it doesn't make any sense as a strategy. Because his first option, he was trying to create leverage by showing Canada has other options. But if that's the goal, it completely backfired. Trump went from praising the China deal to threatening 100% tariffs. That's not leverage. That's escalation. The second option was he genuinely believes Canada can rebalance away from the US dependence, but the math doesn't work. Even if Canada increases exports to China by 50% by 2030, which is the government's stated goal, that's still only 7 to 8% of exports. You can't replace 75% with 8%. Your option 3 is he's playing to a domestic audience. Anti-Trump sentiment polls well in Canada, so standing up to the US, even symbolically, looks like strength. But if that's his calculation, it's just reckless. Because if you're creating real economic risk for domestic political points, guy, that's not good. Fourth option here is he genuinely believes the North American model is finished and he's positioning Canada for a post-US dominance world. But if that's the read, he's doing it before the world actually exists, which leaves Canada exposed in the transition. And none of these options are really good. None of them really explain why Carney would open the door to Chinese EVs, criticize the US at Davos, and then act surprised when Trump actually responded. Guys, and what this really means for Canadians is if you work in the auto sector, you should be worried. Ontario Premier Doug Ford said this deal is going to be horrible for the auto sector and warned it will hurt every manufacturer and supplier tied to the industry. And he's right. Because even if the 49,000 vehicle cap is small now, the signal is what matters. It can always grow as well. Carney told Chinese EV makers he wants to see the investment in Canada within 3 years. And that's not just about cars. That's about supply chains, battery plants, and technology integration. And all of that makes Canada look like a workaround for Chinese companies that can't access the US market directly. And if you're a worker in manufacturing, steel, aluminum, softwood, or any industry dependent on US market access, you should be asking what happens when Trump actually follows through. because a 100% tariff on Canadian goods would be catastrophic. And the government's response so far has been to say there is no trade deal with China. That's technically true, but it's also beside the point because Trump isn't threatening Canada over a trade deal. He's threatening Canada over the signal Carney sent. To tie it all up here, guys, Trump threatened a 100% tariff on Canada if we make a trade deal with China. The government says there's no trade deal. That's technically true, but it's a distraction because this isn't about USMCA language or canola tariffs. It's about Carney's signaling. He opened the door to Chinese EVs that China couldn't get through Mexico. He praised China as more predictable than the US. He went to Davos to criticize American economic coercion, and then he acted surprised when Trump actually responded. This isn't a miscalculation. It's deliberate provocation dressed up as pragmatic diversification, guys. And now Canada's discovering what happens when you signal defiance without leverage to sustain it. Guys, Canada's not a free-floating middle power. Canada is embedded in the US system, and that doesn't mean we have no agency. It means that our agency is constrained. And when you test those constraints without exhausting negotiation, first, you don't create leverage. You trigger enforcement. And before you pivot to China, negotiate with the US. Before you lecture about economic coercion, show where you tried it diplomatically. And before you act surprised by the backlash, be honest about what you are actually trying to achieve. Because right now, this doesn't look like strategy. It looks like rhetoric that outran reality. And this is all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys liked today's episode. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment in the comment section below. I would love to hear what you guys think about this whole muck-up that we have with the US right now. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. Stay informed, stay curious, and God bless Canada.
This is Canada. Maple syrup and like Captain Say. Kick your ass all hockey season.